our updates and be part of our conversation squad.
So,
Are we live? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a very special Manthan meeting this morning, Sunday. Our guest needs no introduction really, Mr. Arun Shourie. Mr. Shourie especially doesn't need introduction to a Manthan audience because this is his 7th or 8th meeting at Manthan, but as he says that this is his first online meeting. Welcome, Mr. Shourie. If you don't mind, I'll give a brief introduction, although I said that you don't need an introduction. Mr. Shourie has been in public life, actually initially started within government in the then Planning Commission, and then for extended periods in the media, which will be the subject of the conversation today. And then lastly, as we know, he was a minister of the NDA government of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee between 1998 and 2004. He has a PhD in economics, actually, from Syracuse University. And then after his brief stint in the Planning Commission, the extended period in the media, mainly in the Indian Express in 2 stints. Again, he will talk about that. And also briefly in the Times of India. He has won a number of awards. Other than the press awards, he's also the recipient of the Magsaysay Award, and he's also received the Padma Bhushan. The subject of the conversation today will be his latest book, which was about his stint in the media, especially, as I said, in the Indian Express. It is very attractively titled The Commissioner of Lost Causes. You can guess what the title implies, but we will hear from him how that he was given that title, as it were, and what his work was in the media. Welcome, Mr. Shourie, and thank you for being with us. Over to you, Vikram.
Thank you. Thank you. First, thank you, Mr. Shourie. Apart from the long introduction, I must tell that one of our strongest supporters for Manthan in the last 16 years has been Mr. Shourie, and we are grateful to him to be with us today in the morning. And I've read through the book, sir, and it's really, a very engaging book, I must say. And I would only first begin by asking you, how did it, I know from the book how we chose the title, but I would like you to mention that to the audience.
Yes. Well, actually, we had been doing a series of stories on the condition of under trials in India. Persons who were in jail not because they had been convicted, but not come up in court for hearing. And over time, we discovered that they had been there for years. And often, many times, many years more than the maximum sentence they would have been given if they had been convicted of the crime with which they were charged. And we discovered a lady in Bihar. She had gone mad in the jail. Nobody knew why she's there. She, of course, could not explain why she's there. And then the jailer took pity and petitioned the High Court that, sir, the file has been lost. We don't know why she's here. What should we do? And in its great majesty, the court said, let the file be traced. So these were the conditions, and this series had gone on probably for 8-9 months. And almost, it was estimated that about the Supreme Court gave several judgments. And as a result, almost 40,000 persons were released. So Ramnaji was very happy with the series. So he came one day to my cabin, opened the door, and said, "मैं तुम्हारे office के बाहर एक board लगाऊंगा, the Commissioner for Lost Causes." That is his way of complimenting you, to say, and put up a board outside. That is why I chose that title.
Sir, I think the book has a fair amount of detail on your relationship with Mr. Goenka. So I would only like to ask you, what were the high and low points in the relationship with him? And actually, I would like to ask you whether in the present world, do you think that we can find another owner of a newspaper like him?
Well, you see, Mr. Goenka was an absolutely exceptional fighter. He was a real tiger. And it was only because of him that we were able to do the work that all of us did together. And he gave us the opportunities which nobody else would ever have given us. And he was a very resourceful fighter, a very crafty fighter who could get around governments. And so it is naturally with great fondness and gratitude that I remember him. Of course, he gave you a lot of freedom till he dismissed you. So at that time, one should use that freedom to do good work. But as far as owners today are concerned, I mean, I don't know the press in India as a whole, etc., so I don't know. But at least in the major papers in English, I certainly don't see a fighter among them. Many of them have just proclaimed that they are not in the newspaper business, they are in the advertising business. And news for them is something that is used to fill up the space between advertisements. That's their official ideology. So what can you expect of them? Then many of them say, no, we are in the infotainment business. We are not, we are actually in the media, we should be in the business of conveying facts to readers. How many readers we can reach? It is a public trust, it is a public duty. It's a platform for doing something for the country. And if you think that the whole thing, the purpose is infotainment or something, I mean, it's just bunk.
Yeah.
It's a dereliction of duty and of opportunity. So whether Mr. Goenka can be there or not, I don't know. But certainly we don't see anyone on the horizon of that kind. The Indian Express continues to do some very good work from time to time. The Northern Indian Express, Northern and Western. I don't know about the Southern one. And but the good work that is being done now is being done outside the so-called mainstream media. You see, if we look at the work done during the COVID, the efforts of the government to suppress the truth about COVID, then it was one paper did it, that was Dainik Bhaskar. They sent reporters all along the banks of the Ganges to see about the bodies. But other than that, it was Barkha Dutt working as an individual. It was the photographer of the print magazine. These were the persons, and Indian Express from time to time, they are the persons who brought out the truth. Not the main media. Main media was just swallowing and vomiting the untruths of the government. So where is the question of owners and editors and so on?
Yeah.
I think building on Vikram's question and what your response, Mr. Shourie, you, in a sense, inspired your colleagues to undertake investigative journalism in the early 80s. And now we're, as you just spoke, we're in a completely different era. Now, there are many reasons for this. I wonder whether one reason is what you feel about the role of the courts. Because at that time, the era of investigative journalism kind of coincided with an activist court. I mean, in your book, you do have critical comments to make about the courts in certain respects, but you also, like in this under trial issue, you talk about how the courts took a proactive position. But today, when the courts themselves are not willing to hold up, the freedom of expression, are not willing to defend journalists, do you think that is a major contributing factor, not the only one, to the state of journalism today and to the demise of investigative journalism, as it were?
That's a very important point. You see, what happened was that this was the phase after the emergency. And the judges, especially many of the conspicuous judges, were actually trying to make up or to retrieve the reputation which they had lost during the emergency. For instance, 9 high courts had stood up to the government's actions, but the Supreme Court had caved in. And so the Supreme Court judges were very keen to retrieve that reputation and taking up issues like Menaka Gandhi's passport or under trials or other civil rights issues. These were, for them, occasions to show how liberal they were. So that was one favorable circumstance for us. And but you see, this was a great, what do you call, this was a great thing in the background of people's mind of a safety valve. Because I quoted a remark of Ramnaji right in the beginning that he would say, no, अभी तक हथियार छोड़ने की कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है, क्योंकि अभी तक तो courts हैं. There's still courts are still there. No need to surrender our weapons. We couldn't say that today because it is now the judgments are quite, if I may, sometimes they are good lectures on freedoms, and then on the crucial matter they don't give the relief, and things which should be taken up, which would be taken up suo motu in the past, are not taken up. Encounters and killings in UP, not taken up. Mowing down of farmers, the case is going on and on forever. Gauri Lankesh's murder, now it's the 4th year, and 4 years ago, and the trial has only begun. These activists in Pune, and each one of these becomes the signal for everybody else. And probably that is one of the intents. Kill the chicken to frighten the monkeys. That is what is happening. And therefore there is a pall of fear over the country.
I would like to go back to the book here, and I know of you as a fearless person. And I would like to pick one small, it's the smaller chapter of the book on your encounter with Datta Samant. And how difficult was it to face a death threat directly? Because he alluded to what happened to Godrej also. I mean, I find it, you must have been really fearless to look him into the eye.
Well, at that time, the seriousness of it did not register. I just took his hand and threw it away. I said, तो हम आपको ऐसे बम्बई में हराएंगे कि आपका पाँव उखाड़ देंगे हम. But it was certainly a threat, and because we had to, during those 4 months, we had to move around in the city, go from one place to the other, contact our workers and colleagues, run the Sunday magazine from a hotel, run the paper from a hotel. We used to go there. So it was not a good time. And then the police one day had brought a recording of his speech. Arun Shourie, in Marathi, it was that iski tange tod do, tab sab kuch theek ho jayega, etc. So that was very bad. But the same thing happened in Delhi when it was said that there's a strike when there was no strike, and the police cordoned off the building from which the paper was produced. And I remember when our efforts to go into the building were thwarted by the police. And eventually, when I led and other 2 editors, we led the people back into the building. The police surrounded the place and cut off the water, then cut off the electricity, and then they beat up the workers. Then they beat up those persons who were trying to bring us food. And where I used to sit in that room, all these glass panes of the windows were broken with stones. And, at that time, you don't realize this because the adrenaline is such. So I was tending to persons who were being wounded. There was a pregnant lady I was attending, afraid that something may happen to her. But when I came back and lay down in a bed in our house at about 3 in the morning, Then I realized what my condition was, that I was just shaking all over my body. And it took me a long time to calm myself down. So yes, it was not a good time. But there were many such occasions. I think when Bhindranwale released the list of persons, I was one of them, probably very high up on the list. So those were also difficult times. But now there is another point, and that is that a new normal has been accepted by the people, that such things will happen. Governments will do them. Some state governments will do them, and certainly the central government will do them. This is now accepted. So the fear is now doubly several layered.
In a way, kind of normalized now. The fear is normalized now. To go back to your...
And oppression is normalized.
Yeah. I suppose, I mean, what I think you have spoken of earlier as well, in some ways, there's a chilling factor in operation and it's become very effective now. To go back to your book, Mr. Shourie, you know, this...
but if I may also add one thing, Mr.
Yes, please.
That in general, I feel that the absence of good investigations in the press is not so much because of fear as because of greed. Greed trumps fear.
Yeah.
For instance, we do not have any good, other than the work done by Sucheta Dalal and her husband Debashish in Money Life.
Mm-hmm.
We do not have any investigations into the condition of the financial regulatory institutions. Now, if we pursued that, it would not be, I don't think there would be violence. The Indian firms have not taken to violence thus far. So why is that not being done? Partly because of laziness, but partly because of greed.
Absolutely.
So I think we should not give that much exclusive importance to fear. We must take into account the effect of greed.
Yeah, as you said, some newspaper owners say that we are not in their news business, but in the advertising business, and which is really business, actually.
Yes.
It's
now a new ideology.
If I can go back to your book, one of your, many of them were landmark investigations. This, you know, in an investigative journalism, you're never fully in control. You don't know how the story will go, how it will develop. If we can talk about Kamala, you know, which is hugely shocking at that time that such practices were happening in the heart of India. You write about the great care you took to, for example, keep judges informed, keep various people informed what you're doing, etc. But still, looking back, do you think, you know, with the benefit of history, that could it have been done differently? You do write that you had not thought about, once she came to Delhi, what afterwards? And then there was a whole series of, you know, you had to fight to have her in a home, etc. And then one day she just disappeared. I mean, and she was a troubled person, and you know, you never knew about, you know, what happened. Is there any way you can think that it could have been done differently? I mean, as I said, one can never be in control of an investigative journalism story. But in this particular case, could it have been done any differently?
It's difficult to say, you know, whether that effect could have been, because after all, it did shut the mouths of the Madhya Pradesh government, which was denying the existence of the practice.
Yeah.
And whether it has contributed at all to the practice being erased, I can't say. But that only subsequent inquiries would show one way or the other. But it was a young reporter, he was a daring reporter. He took the risks, and my task was only to shield him and maybe, you know, to, in a minor way, assist and run to the courts and so on with other colleagues. So But you are right. No story, if it is pursued for any length of time, you would, various turns will come at unexpected turns will come, and one has to deal with them at that time.
Yeah.
Whether we are pursuing, let's say, a chief minister, and then courts come into the picture. Then you have to assist the lawyers by giving them the documents that you have, and so on. So if the story is going to last some time, as it should last, then there will be many turns, and we should be prepared for that. And one of the rules that I always followed was that the first assault, of course, must be overwhelming. The documentation must be like an avalanche, but keep a lot of the documentation in reserve. That fellow will deny it. Governments will deny it. They'll put out some misleading thing. They will suborn some papers or journalists to discredit your story. Then you should be able to come back with a second volley, which would be devastating.
Right.
So there were many sort of rules of thumb which worked like that.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry, Vikram, but just I want to follow up. I know I was actually referring to another aspect also. In your book, you write about the emotional conversation you had with the reporter decades later. For various reasons, he left journalism, etc. But about Kamla herself, later found that she was a troubled person, and then she just disappears. We don't know where she is. So whether
Yes, we tried.
Yeah.
We tried everything. And at least the police went through the motions of trying to locate her.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not easy to go away from that Arya Samaj home, because there was only one gate. But obviously, through the connivance of some persons, maybe those who thought they will be exposed if she speaks the truth to some authority, they must have whisked her away, but it was not possible for us to locate her. And at least the police said that they could not find her. That's what they told Justice Bhagwati's court.
Vikram, yeah.
No, sir, there's another few chapters in the book on this case of the missing file. I find it a delightful story, though of course the underlying thing is a very sleazy deal, and that's a different question altogether. I think you must tell us about how you were on at it for more than 2 years now to trace that missing file, and how you were so sure that the file can be found.
No, you see, the story was like this, that the Public Accounts Committee, headed by Mr. R.R. Murarka at that time, a businessman, they were trying to investigate a particular contract given to a company, so-called company in Hong Kong, for purchase of oil. It was a $50 company which was given a contract for $200 million at a fixed price, when actually international prices were falling. So there was this big gap. And the Public Accounts Committee was inquiring into this, and the government kept saying that, sorry, we can't answer these questions because the file is missing. No, actually, that is a very, not a very good reason, because the file can easily be reconstructed. Supposing there's a fire, but Vikram would have written to Arun, Arun would have written to Reddy, Reddy would have written to somebody else. So from the other offices, the file can be reconstructed. But the government always kept saying, no, next week. And they kept saying this because they knew that the Public Accounts Committee's term is coming to an end. But when all this was going on, probably the whole pressure from the Public Accounts Committee came on the secretary, who was actually a very good and competent secretary called Mr. Lavraj Kumar. And he probably felt conscience-stricken that why is all the civil servants have done their job, we oppose this deal, and the minister, under the inordinate pressure, political pressure, directed the Indian Oil Corporation and all to enter into the contract. So why are we being blamed for this? That is how he actually, that's how we got to see the file. and then to take notes, and then to verify the notes from others, and so on. But it was the pressure on the civil servants which made them come out with the truth.
Yeah.
And that often happens. That's a good thing. Sometimes information comes by chance. Sometimes it comes because a rival puts it out. So we should be open to all sources.
I think the fraction of conscientious officers were much higher then than.
Yes.
That's also
Yes.
possible.
Because it's a comprehensive failure, Vikram, comprehensive deterioration in the quality of persons and the adherence to norms and ideals across professions. After all, in journalism, we hear the same thing, in law, in medicine. A great friend of mine has edited a book for the Oxford University Press called Healers or Predators. So, in across professions, and of course in public life, the adherence to norms has just subsided. And that is the problem, that you don't know where to run, because the other fellow will also be the same kind. Supposing I had a difficulty and ran to the police station, same problem. If from the police station I ran to the lower court, maybe the same problem. I ran to the media, same problem. So that's the and none of these things that are happening today, for instance, loot from the banks, could happen without the active participation and collaboration of the bank managers, chartered accountants, lawyers, the entire professional class.
Yeah.
And they are all secure in the knowledge that not one of them has had to suffer because of this. Lakhs of crores missing from the banks, and nobody is in jail. That's nobody. Strange. Not strange. Predictable, and then the consequences are also predictable.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Across professions, this is happening. But at the same time, perhaps there are groups of young people like our backup team who are dedicated and committed, like even those who come out from the law schools, some journalists, who have been working in smaller publications. Shourie, again, go back to your book. I should have said this earlier for the benefit of readers, that this is a fascinating account both of that period as well as of the many stories that you had done. And, some of us were around at that time, so we recall that many were too young or were not even born in the 80s. So they would really both enjoy and benefit from learning how these stories were done, what were the issues, and how far one could go, with the protection of the courts, and how there was still here and there an element of morality in public life. Coming to the story, I mean, you couldn't have included all of them in the book. But one thing I remember, for example, that you had done in your second stint, a couple of them on Reliance, on one case of the CBI director's son, running a shell company for supplying to Reliance. I know that subsequently you had a different view expressed about, why Reliance did what it had to at that time. But wouldn't it have been interesting, for the record, to include one or two of those articles that you had, one or two of those investigations that you had overseen, to give an idea to viewers what the issues were at that time, and why you took it up at that time, and why you may see it differently today, because there's a kind of silence on Reliance there, other than a few references in the book.
One or two things. Firstly, as I mentioned, this book is not a comprehensive, by any means, an account of those years. So many other things were happening. They are not even a comprehensive account of the items which have been dealt with in this book. So many other things were happening. It was just some interesting things which my colleagues and I did directly. A third thing is that I've had to leave out, you see, it's already almost, it is 600 pages, longer than my article. So, and therefore many things that were interesting at that time had to be left out. For instance, as I have mentioned, every incident which led to a book of mine, to a subsequent book, I've had to leave out. I've just left out. Let's say the controversies on Shah Banu, on Rashdi's book. I wrote quite a lot about them at that time, but they led to my book on fatwas. So I've left it out. Similarly, while I've dealt peripherally with the decision of Mr. VP Singh on Mandal and what happened subsequently with Devilal and so on, but I have not dealt with the reservations issue because that I've dealt with in a book called Falling Over Backwards. So that's one part of it, that I had to leave out a large number of things. And the only rule I could follow is, has it led to a book of mine? Then leave it out. Those were the most interesting things for me because they led to thick books. As far as Reliance is concerned, the work was done by my very dear friend Gurumurthy, S. Gurumurthy. It is his writings that people remember. And I'm sure he will be writing about them at some stage. My view about those things were twofold. Gurumurthy was writing, I'm not in any way disowning what was printed in the paper, but the work was Gurumurthy's work, and the information came to him from several sources, which he put together with great effect. Now, my own view, since the time I wrote my doctoral thesis in 1965-66, has been that actually the Indian licensing system was holding the country back. Whether it was on foreign exchange regulation or it was on industrial licensing and so on. And at that time, I felt that Professor Hayek was right, that laws are made because of circumstances in a society or norms in a society at a particular time. The society grows, the economy grows, ideas change, but those laws then now become straitjackets. So then they are violated in practice, and eventually a new law comes about. That is the sequence I had followed in foreign exchange licensing. When I wrote my doctoral thesis, it was on foreign exchange licensing. And exactly that sequence happened. We went for a liberal import regime. If you ask Mr. Narayan Murthy what happened to him, because he was to go, in those days you were allowed to only $15 or $20 a day when you were abroad. And he had to go from Delhi, from Bombay to Frankfurt, then to some place in, no, he had to go to Paris and then Frankfurt and then come back. But when he was to leave, the person in Paris had said that, no, I can't meet you at such and such a day, I can meet you subsequently. So he went first to Frankfurt and then to Paris, rather than the other way around. And this led to proceedings against him. So that was the kind of regimen that was there. And in Reliance's case, I felt that some of the things, for instance, if you are given a capacity to make 100 units of something, and with the same equipment you make 150, is that good for the country or bad for the country? Now, as far as the violation of the industrial license is concerned, it is naturally a violation of law. And that is what Gurumurthy proved. But in the larger context, it was one of those, violations which would ultimately lead to the liberalization of the licensing regime, of not putting maximum production allowances from the same equipment. etc. So that was the thing. It was, my view had been the same, but it was Gurumurthi's sterling work which led to cornering Reliance at that time, and which also then led to changes in the licensing system.
Vikram, yeah.
Yeah, so the other thing, and if there's one reason I would ask the viewers to read the book, is it because of the tremendous work Mr. Shourie has put on under trials. And it's very moving and what has been done. But I would like to ask you only one question on this. You have a brilliant idea there that there must be a biannual census on the under trial. I think that has anything been done then? Is anything been done on that now?
As far as I remember, the court asked for it, especially in the case of Bihar. But as usual with the court's orders, they then did not follow it up. Maybe for 1 or 2 years the census was done, then nothing happened. So the conditions remain, I mean, I do not know actually the conditions today, but we see in the dramatic cases of Elgar Parishad and others that the poor fellows continue in jail. Varavar Rao is to always keep getting bail.
Yes.
And it's always given for a few days or 1 or 2 weeks. And because the case is just going on and on. And these under trials, many of them persons of sterling worth, and they just continue that way. So census is very necessary. And as governments will not do it, and as courts will not follow up their own orders, it is necessary for each of us to do a little bit on those matters.
In the case of Varavar Rao, he asked for a sipper. Not Varavar Rao, the other person. He asked for a sipper.
Stan,
Yeah,
that
Stan.
father's Stan Swami.
Yeah.
Yes, my wife Parkinson's, and I know how she can. We had to take it when she was able to do it. It was with a straw. They wouldn't give him a straw. You know, what a bloody foolish nonsense! It is a heartless nonsense.
Absolutely.
But that's India, and it's just one of the forgotten things. And who is this constable who would have refused, or the jailer who would have refused? He must be brought to task. And a court which does not do so is derelict in its own duty.
The court asked for the medical report.
No. If you read the judgments of the Supreme Court, Supreme Court judgment, Article 21, right to life is not just a right to physical life, it is to life with dignity, and so on. Big lectures of the Supreme Court. And then this is the implementation on the ground. So people are writing these lectures for each other or for foreign audiences.
Yeah, I think so. But sir, in your the common theme in the whole book is the relentless pursuing facts. Which of these cases would you say was the most difficult to garner facts?
Well, many of them required cooperation of a number of persons. You were mentioning under trials, for instance. All of our colleagues, each of our state correspondents, I would send them, please find out these following things, and they would go to the jails, find them out. I would collate them, and then we would proceed. That required teamwork of one kind. But I think one of the lessons, Vikram, is that, in finding facts, we give too much importance to the documents which are being hidden, secret documents. And actually, many of the facts which we need are available in the printed documents. So we must read the printed documents. And journalists often complain that, we can't get this fact because the government is not releasing those facts. Well, governments always try to hide facts, and it is our job to ferret them out. And much of that can come about by using such facilities as are still available in India. For instance, the work that Shyamlal Yadav does in the Indian Express of the North, by using the right to information, which has been emasculated, that right. But he uses it very skillfully to get documents out. Similarly, in many of the autopsies, autopsy reports or charge sheets that have been filed against persons killed in encounters, the Indian Express here shows that they are just copy and paste. Look at 20 autopsies, the same thing. How can it be? So those are documents that were not that difficult to get. Some of them were in the courts. So I would urge that yes, facts have their own power, their own force. And therefore, to ferret them out, look for the documents that the government is hiding, but even more than that, look for the printed document and study it carefully.
Yes.
Could I, Mr. Shourie, when you started these whole investigative stories, the reporters must have really been enthused that they were given the opportunity to follow certain leads, etc. But you also talk about the reaction from the senior editors. They frowned on what you were doing. There were run-ins, etc. But over a period of time, by the time you left in the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken, had the attitude of the senior editors in both the papers that you worked for, had it changed, to embrace the importance of doing these kind of stories? Of course, later, they kind of ended, but was there a change is what we're wondering, whether, the establishment initially resisted, but then seeing the resonance that these stories had with the readership, the kind of changes it made to a certain extent in public policy, was there a greater acceptance of this form of journalism?
In general, they may appropriate them saying, see the power of the press, we have demonstrated the power of the press, etc. But I don't think there was much of a change of heart. In fact, person who had done sterling work himself on reporting, like Mr. George Verghese, continued with that, and he was instrumental in suppressing what I was writing. The fact that after I was removed, all these things stopped, again shows that the establishment had not changed its view. Many of the editors had already left journalism. So in that sense, their views did not count as much. But if you see their writings in their memoirs, Nihal Singh, even Kuldeep Nair, certainly George Verghese, they certainly continued to frown on this kind of work, saying this is not journalism, it is pamphleteering, all this nonsense. But we should be deaf. We should be deaf. We should do what we think we can do, or we should do, and have a person like Mr. Goenka back us up. So the views of the editors, okay, they can keep writing their essays.
Sorry, was there a...
But there's a lesson. But there's a lesson, if I may mention. Yes, the senior editors and the owners may stop you from doing what you think should be done. Or you may uncover the facts, say on Chinese incursion, and the editor or the newspaper does not allow you to do the story that your facts reveal. But it is our duty in those circumstances to get the facts out in spite of the owners and so on through some other device and get them out to the public, to howsoever many people we can use. If not our readers, maybe the internet fellows. Maybe not in our name, but in Reddy's name, in Vikram's name. So don't sit on the facts just because the paper or the editor or the owner are not allowing you to disclose those facts.
Yeah.
By the way, a good example in that is this Kuo oil deal, which you were mentioning, in which Mr. Verghese, at the pressure of Mr. Goenka, who at the pressure of the government, stopped that series on absolutely indefensible grounds. Oh, how can we disclose the contents of a file when the parliament has not been given a file, and this will be contempt, this will be violation of the privilege of parliament. Oh, but nonsense, I'm assisting parliament. How will it be a violation of their privilege? But the articles were stopped. So what did I do? I think, and I would do it again today, that is, we came home in Munirka, about 2 miles from here. There was a cyclostyling shop. We cut out, I did not know, cut out the stencils, made 75 copies at night, and at 3 a.m., those copies were distributed to 75 MPs, starting with Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And there was great hangama in Parliament. Parliament couldn't proceed because of those cyclostyle sheets giving the preliminary details about this deal. So the paper now was forced to report the halla in Parliament, but they could not report why there is that halla. Yeah. So that dilemma in the end forced them to allow me to publish the entire series for 2-3 months. It led to my dismissal.
I was also wondering whether there was, I mean, we are talking about the English language journalism, print media in particular. Did you, over those 10, 15 years, see a change in the regional language? Because after all, their reach is much more. Did they pick up some of these, not the stories, but these ideas, this way of doing journalism, especially Hindi, Marathi, Malayalam? Did you see anything happening in the regional language press?
Actually, I'm not that well acquainted either with the English language press and certainly not with our Indian languages press. But I know that some work was certainly done. For instance, in Ranchi, there was a paper called Prabhat Khabar, run by, the editor was Harivansh. He is today the deputy chairman of the Rajya Sabha. It was his work and the work of his colleagues and of that paper in faraway Ranchi and the editions which they had, which led to the uncovering of the fodder scam, for which Mr. Lalu Yadav is suffering even today. Similarly, another subsequent chief minister in Jharkhand was actually in jail because of the work done by Prabhat Khabar under Harivansh. So probably a lot of work must have been done, but I am not that familiar with it.
I asked this question in the context of the world of fake news and biased journalism that we live in. I'm sure that if you were active today, you would have pursued Pegasus in a different manner. The government cleverly has said that the Defense Department, the Ministry of Defense has not paid anything for buying Pegasus. I assume that the Ministry of Panchayat Raj would have paid for it, but they didn't say that. So if it was an opportunity like that, what would you have done?
We continue to find out the facts, continue to contact those, look at what the team appointed by the Supreme Court, whether it has done a thorough job or not. We should not leave that story. And certainly this kind of evasion that the Ministry of Defense has not paid. Well, Vikram has not paid, maybe Reddy has paid. So how does that, has the government paid or not? And in any case, which is the company which would pay such an enormous amount for each connection that is monitored? Nobody is now disputing the fact that it was used in India. So how could it be used by individuals or individual companies? And now we learn from Andhra that it was offered to them, or to Bengal, it was offered, and the state governments refused. So those things should certainly not be let go of at all. And one should examine the work that has been done by, after all, Supreme Court took notice of it, then it set up an expert committee. So what has the expert committee done? That should be in the public arena. It's not for the private edification of judges. It's a public issue. So we should pursue that. I always felt that that we should our job is not to be butterflies, coming on a flower, then going to another flower, and then going to a third flower. We have to be crocodiles. If you get somebody's leg in your jaws, don't let go of that leg. So if we get one story and Pegasus, then we must pursue it to the end.
So Mr. Shourie, in your book, your second stint with the Express ends rather sadly and kind of coincides with Mr. Ramnath Goenka's death. And then you kind of say that not lost interest, but it's almost the fight went out of you that to continue with this. Did you think of not joining another publication as much as starting some?
Excuse me, are we? No, it did not coincide with his death, but with his grave illness. And the second is that it would take too much energy to start something for me. I work alone, and to look after all these various things, it would be impossible. So it's easier to write books. Easier to write books, yes. Sit at home, just read and just compile a book of your own.
Ask because there's sort of dispiriting.
But it is wonderful. Our friends in The Wire have been able to set up Siddharth Varadarajan, M.K. Venu and others who were in major papers. They didn't continue with the papers or were not allowed to continue in the manner in which they thought was necessary. They set up The Wire. My friend Shekhar Gupta has set up The Print. Barkha Dutt has set up her own production house. So those wonderful examples, and it's a very creative response to the pressures of government that people are now finding something else to do and getting the facts out. That's a very creative response of society. And and I would urge them also to please look 2-3 years ahead. Because so, as you can see, the government is already moving in on the digital space. How to suppress that, how to control that. So one should now try to make the master the technology to create the networks that would be required 2 or 3 years hence to get information out into the public arena.
Piece of information, I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago, Outlook magazine had a detailed issue on these digital, we know about Wire, we know about Scroll, etc. They had a very detailed account of many stories about what was happening in digital media in the regional languages, and they seem to be more enterprising, pushing boundaries more. And of course, at greater risk, and they're more vulnerable since, the state governments can be as despotic as central authorities can be. I mean, so in a sense, there is hope in some corners for the media as yet.
Indeed,
yeah, Vikram.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That's a very important point, Mr. Reddy, that we should
I think
not
Vikram
think
has
of
got
the media.
frozen. I wanted to ask,
if I may just mention one thing in response to what you were saying, we should stop thinking of the media in terms of the major newspapers or the major channels. Actually, the media action is now outside those things. So we should focus on those. Maybe that's the digital world of the regional media. Maybe it is. But you see, a very good example would be, you remember that case that is now still not going on, so to say, of the minister's son driving a car and mowing down some farmers in that Lakhimpur Kheri. Now, that is not a video done by any mainstream channel, not by a newspaper. It's somebody taking the video as an individual, and it records an event which would just have been brushed aside earlier. So, in a sense, each of us can be a journalist for tomorrow. And we should be alert enough and find the way to get the information to somebody who will then put it out. So you are right. Maybe the Outlook story correctly points out the good work that is being done by regional papers in the digital space. That's wonderful. Another reason for hope.
There's a wonderful reason for hope, sir, in one of the many instances in your book is on the Bihar press bill. And while you were, of course, as usual, relentless on what Jagannath Mishra was saying, what I liked in the end was that you managed to have a press boycott. I mean, how did you manage, because they have diverse interests, but all of you agreed that you'll have a boycott? And is it something which we can do today?
Well, it was, I don't know, it was a moment. You see, the memories of the emergency were still fresh in people's mind. And there was not that pervasive fear as there is today. And if I may say so, not that much greed. And people were genuinely enthusiastic about press freedom and what the press could do. That is why it was easier at that time to get people together. But the press must, individual paper that is being victimized today, or the individual journalist, but it is him today and me tomorrow. So they should get together, and bodies like the Editors Guild and others should be strengthened by the press itself. And they should find occasions on which to act. Don't let the occasion slip by. And whether it is possible or not really depends on each one of us.
Yeah.
Because after all, it's a very good definition of hope. That hope is the policy that someone else will do it. That someone else will do it. But nobody is going to come and do it for us.
Yes. Yes, Ram, there are quite a few questions from the audience. I don't think we should. You're muted, Ram.
Yeah, maybe now we can switch to the questions from the audience. I'm sure they will have many of them.
Yeah.
Before we take, let me. There's one interesting question from Professor Gopal of Anna University, saying, what is the impact of post-truth, which is a new term, of course, on lost causes? I think what he is trying to ask is whether in the age of post-truth, we can take up lost causes, or would we have been able to take up lost causes if there was post-truth at that time as well?
You see, actually, that's right. Post-truth has become a fashion now, because certainly in Trump's case, he said there are one of his press or one of his associates, she said that there's an alternate reality, and that became the fact. But you see, we should have some confidence that eventually life will puncture their claims. You can go on. And secondly, that if people keep trying here, there, everywhere, something or the other will get out. They may suppress, they may successfully prevent its publication in the papers, or it's being shown on the media. But people will use cell phones, they will block WhatsApp. But in India, the word of mouth carries. I think if you see the number of train journeys in India, probably, I don't know how many, but maybe 5 billion or something every year. Everybody is a journalist carrying information from one place to the other. They are sitting in the compartment, gossiping, conveying information to each other. We have to only feed that information into the oral network in India. We are an oral culture. So we should have, if the Chinese dissidents can outmaneuver or can sneak information through the crevices of the Chinese state, which is so much more powerful and probably so much more efficient than ours, why are we so discouraged?
No, sir, we are trying our best to be like China, sir. Don't lose hope. There's a good question from Sukhdev Sohal, the dark question, I would say. Is India falling in the bylanes of Italian and German history of 1920s and 30s?
Well, and so I think we should not only look at those grand, because the evil of Hitler was on a much bigger scale. And in a sense, when we compare the present regime, let's say, to Hitler's regime, we are discounting our own argument. So we should look at Erdogan, we should look at the Venezuelan Chavez, we should look at Duterte in Philippines, these or Orban in Hungary, they are all of a club, and we are following their methods. The governments are following their methods, and the consequences are also in this coming up in the same way. And many of it almost seems that they are copying each other's rhetoric, they are copying each other's technologies, techniques of getting misinformation out, of controlling institutions, of not changing the constitution, but packing your people into those institutions. So those institutions now start behaving in a very different way, even though the nameplate remains the same. All these things are being done by these governments, by our government and those governments, and probably they see each other. But one thing which should warn us about the 1920s in Germany, and earlier than that in Mussolini's Italy, is the participation of almost the entire population. It's not Hitler who was killing the Jews personally. He set the tone. And if you see on the campaigns to identify the Jew, it were common persons like you and me who worked to do that. Not just to identify the Jewish shop, as is happening in India now, who is this Muslim shop, or the Muslim bangle seller in Indore. It's the participation of ordinary people. But in that case, land records had to be seen. If you 4 generations ago you had Jewish blood, you were identified. And that did not happen only by government servants, but by ordinary citizens doing it. So in that sense, the Indian society is becoming a participant to things which will turn out to be a grievous wrong day after tomorrow. So there is that similarity. There are other similarities. But I would think that we should, and the great lesson from that is that we have to act early. Tomorrow will be too late. So networks, alternate networks should be formed now. Alternate technologies should be mastered. We should reach out to people who are not in our immediate circle. If you see the number of friends, we are all talking to each other in a very small circle.
Yes.
But just see, if I may give an example that I had to use the other day, since the 1950s, the RSS has been reaching out to whom? To persons who would not be in your list and my list of persons we should reach out to the so-called sadhus, who gather in Kumbh Mela and others. We may dismiss them, but in a sense, they are influentials in small circles, in some village. So here is a set of people in India who are influentials and whom the RSS is reaching out to and co-opting. So if we want to prevent India from sliding down into these terrible valleys, then we have to reach out to much beyond our very limited circle. So many lessons from the 20s and 30s and from the contemporary world.
There's a question from Ravi Suryadevaraya. I mean, I think you answered that in your talk, but since he has asked it, I could convey it. Is journalism today acting as it did during the emergency, other than exceptions like people like you and Kuldeep Nair? So, in a kind of era of informal emergency, is journalism behaving the same way as it did in 75, 76.
If there is an informal emergency, there is also an informal behavior.
Yeah.
But it was not me, but Mr. Goenka, Mr. Kuldeep Nair, Bushro Irani, Rajmohan Gandhi's Himmat, Mr. Korwala's opinion, and Raj and Ramesh Thapar's seminar. They were the ones who were standing up as publications. Now, but I think Mr. Advani's phrase rings true even today. When they were asked to bend, they chose to crawl. So also today, I don't think that the oppression is as great as it is made out to be. It has almost become an excuse for not doing the right thing. And it's an excuse used by very prosperous journalists. Not fear, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. There's a different question from Abhilash Paruchari that we would like to know what authors inspired Mr. Shourie in writing and pursuing his way of living and his drive.
Well, it's difficult to say about these big people being inspirations for us little ants.
Yeah.
But certainly, I've turned time and again to these 100 volumes of Gandhiji's collected works.
Yeah.
And that has been both therapeutic and a guide. And as you will see in the book, his writings influenced me at that time, come in for mention many times in the book. But figures like him, figures like Mandela, they should be our beacons.
Palle Sujana asks, do you ever think in India politicians and bureaucrats would be scared of journalists and reporters due to their investigative journals?
Not if the reporters and journalists continue the way they are today. Which owner is afraid of a lapdog? He may be afraid of some watchdog, but not a lapdog. So if we behave like that, then who will be afraid of us?
Yeah.
And also they would be afraid only if other institutions are prepared to take up the work that journalists do. Let us take that somebody, if Sucheta and somebody bring out information about the National Stock Exchange, and that is not taken up by the institutions which should take them up, SEBI, then why would the persons doing something wrong in National Stock Exchange fear the exposure?
Yeah.
It's now only accidentally that it has come out.
Right.
But these two wrote all about it in 2018-19.
Yeah.
So the ball has to be taken up by others also. The journalist can do the stories, he can bring out the facts. Of course, it is his duty to do his duty at least.
Yeah.
But others have to do theirs. Then, yes, officials may not be afraid, but at least they would have to reckon with the consequences.
There's another question from Mr. Seshadri Giridhar. I mean, you would probably recall this, that there was a bureaucrat who was able to defy Rajiv Gandhi and give the contract for the HBJ pipeline, not to Snam Progati, but to Spi Kapag, if that's the way you pronounce it, because Kapag gave the better terms. Now, can we imagine something like that happening in today's world, in Delhi, in the central government?
It doesn't seem to be the case. Firstly, the facts don't come out.
Yeah.
And second, when they come out, no consequences follow. Or third, even when they come out, and consequences could follow. The Supreme Court gives its stamp of approval, as happened in the Rafael case. So it is a much more, it's a changed environment.
Yeah. Varun Mutra makes a comment saying that fascism is not about the leader and his control over institutions, but the participation of wider sections of society in the pogroms of the dominative narrative of the leader.
It's a good sentence of Gandhiji, who used to say that the saying Yatha Raja Tatha Praja is a half-truth. Yatha Praja Tatha Raja.
Correct.
So in many ways, what we do is done on a magnified scale by the rulers. So we should always look at our own conduct also, rather than only keep blaming or casting the blame onto others. He's right on that. Yes.
I think that there are more questions, sir, but I think we'll stop here. We thank you once again for being at Manthan. And whether you write another book or not, please do come back to us. And it's always a great honor and a privilege to have you here with that, both not just for speaking to us, but also in supporting the movement of Manthan, which it is today.
It's a wonderful thing that you and Ajay set up together. And I really wish that will continue for a long, long time. And we are all grateful to you, Mr. Reddy, and to the memory of Ajay, and to this young team that assists you in getting this to a medium which you and I would not know about.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for being with us this morning. First, I will ask you to please buy the book on it's an Amazon, or you can use the link on Manthan's link to buy the book. It's a very engaging book, and you won't put it down. We close here. Our next session is on April 24th online. Surit Pathsarthi will speak to us on the secular court and the freedom of religion. He will speak to us on April 24th. We are also planning to have another in-person session in the first week of May. We'll come back to you on that. As you can see now, we'll be having a combination of in-person events and online. Please come to us every time at Manthan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shourie. Thank you for giving us time. In spite of difficulties, your time here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and Vikram. Thank you. Thank you. And Raisa and all her team. Thank you.
Thanks.